1 year ago today at this very time, I was just arriving at NRG Stadium, and Michigan went on to win the 2023 National Championship. Hence, if you're watching on video, I'm wearing not only my trusty home field bomber jacket, I'm also wearing the 2023 National Championship hat. Let's talk a little bit. Let's look back at what happened, as well as what Michigan needs to do to get back there in the future. Let's talk about all of that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Wohl, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Kind of hard to believe it's been a year. Feels like it was forever ago. Also feels like it was just yesterday. Everything has changed in pretty much every way from when Michigan won the national championship. Obviously, the cast of characters, much different, whether it's the players on the field or the coaching staff. What we saw this year pales in comparison to what we saw last year, minus the hilarity of beating both Ohio State and Alabama. But that was a special team, and as much as you'll see a lot of the rival fans cope and seethe today, and you are seeing that on social media, it was as legitimate of a national championship as you can get. Not only because of Connor Stalions gone mid-season, Michigan continued to roll all over everybody en route to winning a national championship. It's that much more legitimate than any other case would have been, because other teams could still steal signs. Michigan did not have a sign stealer any longer. And still, just by virtue of having those playmakers, having the lines that were, the defensive line certainly was better than it had been in the last year or two. Hard to say two, but you can say it was certainly better from top to bottom. The offensive line was the worst out of the 3 years, yet they persevered. They couldn't run at will, and yet they made the plays when they needed to make them. The national championship game itself felt like a little bit more of a formality after the Rose Bowl. But nonetheless, there was a lot of fear going into the game, given that sometimes Michigan could get got when it came to the defensive scheme and a high-powered passing outfit. And Michigan had yet to really see much of a high-powered passing outfit all year, save for Ohio State, and they gave up 24 points to Ohio State. Because Alabama had those options, but it was more of a running team with a running quarterback. So it was a different scenario to see Michael Penix Jr. and the trio of high caliber wide receivers to be able to go into that game and hold them to 13 points. Unbelievable. And to think of the fact that it all started out with Donovan Edwards, a guy who did not have the season that he wanted, and he did not have a subsequent season as he had hoped either. But kind of was able to turn on the Jets and look like 2022 Donovan Edwards at the most crucial and most important time. Without those two runs, it's hard to say what would have happened. Would that have been much more of a game, right? Because it's really difficult to tell, because Michigan jumped out to that 14-0 lead and then kind of held on for dear life for some time before it finally was able to put the game away somewhat late. And I just remember thinking in that game, it was like, okay, it's going to be hard for Washington to come back from this given Michigan's defense, yet they have the type of offense that can. And the fact that they were able to drive the field here and there, the way the first half ended, the fact that they had the opportunity to take the lead without much really going into it, right? Because, all right, they can march down the field at the end of the half and then, or I should say tie the game, not take the lead, I think, because I think it was, I don't remember exactly what the score was there. But for them to be able to get the ball back and for Will Johnson to make that huge play, the huge interception to get the ball back for Michigan. But Michigan was unable to capitalize off of some of that. But nonetheless, just so many of those things that you can think back on. Donovan Edwards' two runs, the interception by Will Johnson, the interception by Mikey Sainristil still seems like that. I mean, that was the game sealing play. Blake Corum's touchdowns. That really just cemented Michigan's place, its legacy, and they became, as Clayton Sayfie likes to constantly remind what Jim Harbaugh said, simply known as national champions. So it was absolutely, obviously, an incredible culmination on a 3-year run, which ended this year. It's kind of funny to think back because Jim Harbaugh almost left after the 2021 season, having beaten Ohio State, made it to the college football playoff, not exactly competitive there, that he considered that mission accomplished, essentially. So for Michigan to have 2 more years of Jim Harbaugh, for things to go the way they did, all that cast of characters, whether it was Blake Corum or, Roman Wilson, J.J. McCarthy, Mikey Sainristil, Chris Jenkins. I mean, just an absolute amazing cast of characters. And it was just one of those things. We talked for basically a couple of years about the climb, and it culminated in that. Unfortunately, it not being pro sports, the climb was over at that point, especially with so many people whose eligibility was up, or guys like J.J. McCarthy, who essentially were going to go and chase their dreams, and rightfully so. Not much more they could accomplish at Michigan. But it's kind of an interesting thing because much like I like to always look back at the 2004 Detroit Pistons, it was kind of the same thing. Playing the Lakers, Washington wasn't the Lakers, let's be clear. But playing the Lakers was, everyone expected the Lakers to win that series. But the part that actually kind of mattered for the Pistons more so was playing the Pacers. That's what it was like to play Alabama. So Michigan got the job accomplished. Certainly there was question, but it wasn't that unlike beating Ohio State and then going into a Big Ten championship game. Still has, and actually when I think about being at Energy Stadium, it doesn't feel that much different than being in Lucas Oil Stadium. But it is different being in either the Big House or the Rose Bowl. Sorry, the Big House or the or Ohio Stadium to being in the Rose Bowl for the Alabama game. Nonetheless, it's a day that we'll never forget. And certainly you hope that there are more opportunities for the Wolverines moving forward, but the job is going to be both more difficult and in some ways less difficult. So for the next 2 segments, we're going to talk about what is going to be required and look at kind of a position by position breakdown of where Michigan stands compared to where it was in 2023. And because obviously you need all hands on deck. So how close or how far is Michigan from a position to position breakdown? We did that in segment 3. What the job entails to get back there, we'll get to in segment 2. We will do that here in just a moment. But before we do, did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and the Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year using all the app's premium features. It's actually reminded me today that this gym that I'm a member of that I have never been to, and I called to cancel, emailed to cancel, that they charged me today. Thank you, Rocket Money. So for me, one of the best features is that subscription tracker, which reminded me very literally today. I've used to cancel services that I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, you're able to automatically set aside money for the future without stressing about budgeting every month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockdown today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockdown. rocketmoney.com/lockdown. First podcast in a little bit since Tampa without me wearing a Jesus hat because I'm wanting to wear the national champions hat. For those who like to come at me in the comments for me sharing my love of Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ, if you think that by saying something in the comments is going to get me to stop or slow down, it's not. The only thing that you can hope for is that I'm going to have an episode like today where I'm celebrating the national championship and I'm going to dress accordingly. So there's that. There's no slowing that down at all. All right, let's talk about why it's both easier and harder for Michigan to get to this repeat scenario. It's going to be interesting because obviously the landscape has changed dramatically, not just from when Michigan started this run, and not even just from the fact that the coaching staff is different and there's all these other aspects. But obviously college football itself has changed. 12-team playoff, as well as NIL, transfer portal, unfettered, all of these things have made it a little bit different. Now, in some ways, it's easier for Michigan. Why is it easier? Because they won't always play Penn State and Ohio State any given year. They'll always play Ohio State. Penn State's not necessarily on there. Oregon might not necessarily be on there. Whoever the power that may be, right? Like Illinois ended up being surprisingly good this year. Like that was and so did Indiana. That was the weird thing about the schedule is that you looked and you said, in preseason, okay, this team should still win 9 games based off of the schedule. I mean, some really difficult games on there. You know, you looked and you saw like, okay, Oregon's going to be tough. Texas, Ohio State, but no Penn State, okay, Washington, we'll see what they are. But then you have Illinois and Indiana surprisingly like really good. Indiana end up being a playoff team. Illinois being what would have generally been a New Year's Six team in the prior years. So things kind of changed there. You look at the schedule this year, which I guess I could do. Didn't plan on doing that, but we can and we will. Let's see how quickly we can do it. I have the link saved, but here's the question. Will it show me 2025 if I click? It will. So 2025, you look, New Mexico. I always say New Mexico State. It's hard to remember which New Mexico exists. Oklahoma, Central Michigan. Now, Nebraska's loading up on the transfer portal. Wisconsin's always going to be a tough out. USC, you never know what you're going to get any year by them. Washington, same. Michigan State doesn't look like they're going to contend. Purdue will be better, but probably not good enough. Northwestern, again, never know. Maryland, probably not very good. So, and then Ohio State. So of those teams on the schedule, at this moment, you say Oklahoma, Nebraska, Wisconsin, USC, I guess Washington, and Ohio State are the ones that are going to be challenging for Michigan. Really, the only ones that if Michigan does take a step forward, that should be a problem for Michigan is probably Ohio State. But Oklahoma and Nebraska are the ones that I more so have circled. And I guess you could put USC there because they have to travel to Los Angeles for that game. So you just kind of don't know what's going to be. But again, no Oregon, no Penn State. And it's just a matter of, okay, if all things end up equal to what they were just this past year, Michigan probably could go 11-0 into that Ohio State game. So, but by virtue of everything, because you don't know what these teams are going to be any given year, it can become more difficult, right? Because Nebraska, with all of the transfer portal, having a number one quarterback in Dylan Raiola, and that being a road game, suddenly that game might be a heck of a lot more difficult than you thought it was, and it becomes more difficult. You start facing teams that maybe Penn State ends up being a 8-4 team, but Nebraska ends up being a 10-win team. Suddenly it's a little bit different. Michigan doesn't play Indiana. Michigan, the only college football playoff team that Michigan faces on the schedule of the 12 teams is Ohio State. And that game's at home. And at this point, it just doesn't seem like Ryan Day has what it takes to beat Michigan anymore. So in that light, it's an easier path, especially with it being 12 teams now, because you can lose a couple games, right? Michigan can lose to Ohio State. And they could lose to, let's say they lose to Ohio State and Nebraska. They still very well could be in the college football playoff, especially if one or both of those teams are in the college football playoff. So it's easier in that light, but it's harder because also you have to play more games, obviously. Potentially, well, not potentially, no matter what, to win a national championship, you have to play more games because it's not just 2 at the end. But, if you say you run the gauntlet, you got to play the Big Ten championship game. You win the Big Ten. Yeah, you got another week off. But if you don't win the Big Ten, you still probably, like, you look at Penn State. Penn State played Oregon, and then a week later they have to play, play SMU. You might have to win like umpteen games to be able to get there. Whereas otherwise before, you probably had to play in the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State didn't in 2016, 2022. But you probably have to play that game. And then you still have to beat at least 3 more teams in order to win the championship. So it becomes a much more uphill battle in ways that maybe it hadn't been before. And you just kind of don't know what you're going to get on any given moment. And if you look at this year, you might say, hey, I don't know that you want to have that bye. But I don't think Michigan's necessarily built like the teams that you saw before them. They seem to be kind of one of those ones that's going to welcome the challenge. And a layoff probably usually does them okay. So kind of don't know exactly what you're going to be getting into as far as that's concerned. But it is going to be the field's a little bit more open. And I think it right now, and it's easier as well because there's no obvious like dynamo teams out there that are powerhouses, right? Like Ohio State kind of looks like it at this moment, but like the last time they won a championship was 2014. Michigan obviously just won a championship. So there isn't the Nick Saban Alabama. Kirby Smart's Georgia does not look like, it looks more like 2017 Kirby, that's a bad year, 2018, maybe 2019 Kirby Smart Georgia, than it looks like 21, 22, 23 Kirby Smart Georgia, right? There's just no obvious team that's going to just come out and just dominate the field on any given year. So with that in mind, you can build that. And I think that through the transfer portal, Michigan, even though there's not a bunch of big names, but through recruiting, transfer portal, you got Bryce Underwood, all of these things. It's like, okay, they are set up for some real big success. Maybe not this upcoming year, but certainly in the years that follow. But I would not be surprised if they made a run next year based off of what they have. Obviously, you need to shore up the offensive line. You need to be able to get wide receivers. So with that in mind, let's go through the position groups and say, like, is that a college football national championship contending unit or is it not? Let's do that here in just a moment. All right, so Michigan wants to get back in the big dance after 3 years. It's funny because it's, again, Ohio State fans are trying so hard to make fetch happen, and they just can't do it because I don't know of a single Michigan fan among you that would change kind of the way things have gone down, because you're coming off of 3 straight college football playoff appearances when it was a 4-team, when it was way more exclusive, which I prefer, as we talked about on Monday. And also just being able to beat, you won all the trophy games, you beat both, rivals, and you beat Alabama in the bowl game. It's kind of like, if you're going to have a down year, it's a pretty good way to do it. Plus, I think that the down year, it helped secure Bryce Underwood. I don't know that if Michigan's not 5-5 at the time, I don't know that they would have been as all in, right? Because it would have been one of those things if they were going in the playoff there, even though they've been working on Bryce since the spring. I think it would have been one of those things where they look and be like, we're kind of fine with our formula and what we have. We don't need to upset the apple cart, right? I think that played a big factor in the late push to go as hard as they did at the end. So I think that you look at what you just had in this given season, it's kind of like, we're all right sitting this one out. Okay. So there's that. But what do they need to do to get back? So let's look at every position group briefly and say, what does it need to be of the caliber that Michigan was in 2023 in order to get there? So let's start at quarterback. I think that it's at this point, it's about equal because you have a guy with J.J. McCarthy talent. He should theoretically be better than J.J. McCarthy. And but right now you kind of have a Cade McNamara. I'd say the floor is higher for Mikey Keene than it was for Cade McNamara. And it's the same thing with Bryce Underwood. The floor is higher for Bryce Underwood compared to J.J. McCarthy. So right now quarterback is at the very least college football playoff caliber. Is it national championship caliber? That will remain to be seen. Running back. Running back, in theory, is also college football playoff caliber. Is it national championship caliber? Remains to be seen. I think that the duo of Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall is incredible, but we have to see the production. You've seen it from Justice Haynes in spurts, right? He was the third running back the last 2 years for Alabama, so it's not exactly the same. But to see those guys carry the load, I think theoretically it will be great. Let's go offensive line. That's the one place that needs some work. Now, that's kind of the big question mark, but at the same time, no one was looking at the offensive line in 2020 and being like, man, it is going to be incredible in 2021. So you hope that they can take that jump. I think that they've got most of the pieces in place they need in order to do it. I would love to still see them add like one big name, it doesn't have to be a big name by the caliber of like, oh yeah, that's a guy that we all know and think like, Nebraska just got the Pritchard from Alabama. It would be nice to get a name like that, but at the same time, Michigan doesn't necessarily need that to do it. It just needs to have a cohesive group. You're going to have at least a couple guys that played on this last year's line that helps, for continuity, and we'll see what it does from there. But they are, I think, a little bit away. And the good news is, if you can get past Oklahoma and Nebraska is going to be tough. I think then you've got time to build it, and you just hope that it has a little bit better of a learning curve, because the thing is by Nebraska is about the time that you want to see that line really performing, and then you want to see it really kind of take off from there. Think about 2018. It was week 4 against Nebraska that you were like, okay, that line knows what they're doing. Okay, so that's kind of what your time frame looks like there. Tight end. I think it's a college football playoff caliber tight end room. Again, I don't know about national championship. Obviously, Hogan Hansen reminds a lot of Colston Loveland, but has not had the year 1 production that Colston Loveland had. You'd feel better about an Andrew Olesh, but I mean, it's a very high floor room. Marlon Klein, if he takes a step forward, getting Max Bredesen back, huge in terms of leadership, as well as also for running the football. So that's really big. Wide receiver is obviously a big question mark. It is not anywhere close to where Michigan was in 2023 at this point. Now, you've got some talented people coming in as freshmen. Andrew Marsh, you're looking at him at the Navy All-American Bowl in practices. He looks great there so far. He's an early enrollee. He's going to have all kinds of practice before he gets to be on the field. And then you look at the same thing, Jamar Browder, Don McCulley. I know people are saying like Indiana got the better of Michigan. I think Michigan needed Donovan McCulley more than it needed Tyler Morris. And it's not like Tyler Morris did an incredible amount of stuff that makes you say, okay, that's exactly what Michigan needed, right? So they do still need to add, I would say, 2 guys to that room. If you can go and get a guy like Caden Robinson or like True, I can't remember his last name, from Louisiana Tech, True Edwards, I think it is. If you can get 1 or 2 of those guys, and I know we're still kind of waiting on seeing what, right, like after the Skylar Bell credit fiasco, or this kind of sounds like the same thing with Troy Stellato. I feel like they still need to add 1 or 2 guys to that room before they are capable. The good news is, defensively, I feel a heck of a lot better, right? So you look at the defense. I would venture to say I feel just as good about the defensive line at this juncture as I did the 2022 defensive line. You've got the depth. You've got guys who can do things like Derek Moore, because he's supposed to be coming back. TJ Guy, because he's supposed to be coming back. Rayshon Benny, because he's supposed to be coming back. You added the transfers in Damon Payne and Trey Williams. You got guys who are emerging like Trey Pierce. You got other guys like Cam Brandt. And then you see if like some of those second-year guys end up stepping up. Can Lugard Idakpai be a guy that steps up, or a guy like Dom Nichols, right? I think that will go a long way. Linebacker, we'll continue to have the linebacker here with Jay Sean Barham for the foreseeable until we see for sure, just because the edge room feels really stacked. I mean, you got the same thing you had this year. Early in the year, you'd be like, not good. But by the end of the year, by the Ohio State and Alabama games, you're like, great, right? The linebacker play was excellent in the end of the season, the last 3 games. So I think you feel really good about what you got there. Add in Troy Bowles to see if Jaden Hood sticks around, if Jimmy Rolder and Cole Sullivan can step up. I mean, then you've got a really solid room. Safety room, a little bit decimated. You see if Rod Moore comes back, but still, you bring in TJ Metcalf. You've got, can Jaden Mangum play a role? Brandon Hillman really stepped up this year. Mason Cole really showed a lot of promise when he was called upon. So you feel like, okay, as long as they can stay healthy, maybe they have that going. And cornerback is a little bit more iffy. That you're obviously wanting to get at least one guy in there, but you still look at Jair Hill, Josiah Edmond, and that's the problem and Zeke Berry. It's like, okay, they need another name at least in there. And can it be Shamari Earls? Who knows? But defensively as a whole, it feels like not only a college football playoff, like I feel like defensively now, they will be what we thought they were going to be this year, where it's like they're going to keep them in every game. That's going to be the case, I think, going into this next year. That's why I don't have as much of a fear when I look at Oklahoma or if you look at Nebraska early in the season, because it doesn't feel like it did against Texas, where it's like guys are still figuring out, the coach is still figuring out the players and vice versa. Now it feels like, okay, now you have the establishment of Wink Martindale, players who have been here, players who are coming in. And for the most part, you're like, okay, they should be able to get out of their own way and be able to help out the offense while they're figuring out a lot of the things they need to figure out. So I don't think Michigan's that far off. And I think by virtue of the quarterback, as long as you can get receivers and the fact that you still have dynamic running backs and got a new offensive coordinator, I think Michigan can be right there. It can be there in a hurry. And that's the thing, though. That's what makes it more difficult. Any team can be if everybody gels together. But the way that Michigan's building, where it's still about culture and about fit and all of those things, I think they're still in a really good place. So I think that they're not wholesale trying to change the entire team. Like you look at like an Indiana, it seems like they're just going to try to, broom everybody out, bring everybody in. Michigan State, same deal. Sometimes that'll work for a year and sometimes it's just not going to work. So if you build through recruiting and then supplement, I think then that's kind of the way that you need to go. And not every team is doing that. Not every team can do that. So I think that bodes well for the Wolverines moving forward. All right, that will do our national championship 1-year celebration. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back on Thursday, likely with a mailbag. So we will talk to you then. Peace.